There are endless obstacles that people must face. Inevitably, some will always be insurmountable regardless of how hard one tries. That's what makes the geniuses with limitless strength and ability stand out so greatly. Unlike everyone else, they can effortlessly stand at the top, dismantling anything in their way. Yet, at the same time, that's also what makes those like Gojo and Sukuna completely out of touch with being strong or successful. An aspect of their characters that becomes readily apparent when you consider that Jujutsu Kaisen is an allegory of the journey children must take to adulthood, having it be such a prevalent theme that the power system itself revolves completely around it. But before we can obtain an accurate perspective on such a vast topic, we need to first clear up the misconceptions that the strongest introduced into the story. After all, they are the largest barrier between delusion and reality. The concept that a sorcerer's power is largely innate talent has been around from the start, with the 80% estimate seeming to be true given the immense prevalence that curse techniques have within the story. As there are things that only they would ever be able to do, most characters form their fighting strategies entirely around the unique ability they were born with. Furthermore, the story presents an inherent gap of an ability's strength, versatility, and potential, ensuring that those granted an exceptional CT will forever exist in a separate world, leaving everybody else with only two choices: either submit to Gojo and Sukuna's whims, or try to stand up for yourself. Regardless of the choice, it will be practically impossible to persuade their ironclad will or become free under their presence. Which is why stand up for yourself becomes run far away. After all, that's the only way for the incapable to strive in their own regard. A reality of the weak that those like Sukuna actively disregard. We all exist within the same physical world, so the challenges people face and their effects could be considered largely universal. Those that fail will have their sense of self destroyed and their ideals changed. But those that succeed will have their sense of self reinforced and their ideals strengthened. Meaning that the upper echelon of geniuses who always win will develop a distorted reality of the world, becoming so self-absorbed that they can no longer connect with their peers, subsequently making all their advice useless and becoming the antithesis of growth. However, stories will rarely address this possibility, and I get it. People naturally want to latch onto the faith that their superiors are people worth following and voices of truth. Something that people cling onto even after they become disillusioned by seeing their heroes as horrible people. Because the strong still provide some sort of comfort in the idea that your shortcomings are not your fault. After all, you followed their footsteps but couldn't get anywhere near their level after an entire life devoted to reaching it. That can only mean that you simply never had a chance in the first place since you weren't born as special as them. An utter lie that doesn't exist in Jujutsu Kaisen. No matter how much the characters cower away from the truth, the story makes it abundantly clear that they're merely placing all the blame onto Gojo, Sukuna, and the world itself. An aspect of the story that is exemplified by the depiction of Sadaro's teaching. From what I've seen, the common consensus in and out of universe is that he isn't a great teacher. It's not that his teaching's particularly bad per se, it just doesn't meet the caliber of excellence expected from the best. His teaching is so ordinary that the story primarily focuses on the students learning through watching Gojo from the sidelines or having different mentors altogether. And yeah, that certainly doesn't give him the best look. But I still think that he has undoubtedly managed to give his students everything they need to surpass him. In fact, I'll go as far as saying that his blasé attitude is the only way for him to achieve it. Because Gojo acting on his desires will leave him the same as Sukuna, a despicable human regarded as the king of curses from his tendency to indiscriminately carve away at everything and everything. A king who only has one lone retainer. A stark contrast to the once-in-a-thousand-years prodigy who managed to cultivate genuine connections with entire generations. Because unlike what we've been shown of Sukuna, Gojo has experienced tremendous failure in life. The hidden inventory arc collapsed his previously unshakable identity, giving rise to someone devoid of answers. An individual in a position of uncontested power who could immediately change the world, but who is too uncertain to do anything at all, leaving a permanent separation between the capable and those in need. That is, unless Satoru himself made an active effort to allow them in. Forcing his way through with excessive fear and looking down on the feeble would only serve to maintain the current status quo. So instead of indiscriminately destroying everything beneath him, he held back. A god amongst man that started limiting his own personal desire in order to provide his students with a safe space where they can grow, wholeheartedly believing that their fragments of strength could blossom into something greater than himself. Like children, everyone below the absolute pinnacle of strength has an infinite potential to become the greatest. Yet it's impossible for all of them to effectively utilize that opportunity, given that they need to take the correct path. For no novice, no matter how gifted, could ever possibly compare to a full-fledged veteran, simply due to the latter having crossed bridges that the former can't even imagine. Mastering anything in life involves a plethora of obstacles from the minuscule to the gigantic. Even if somebody didn't manage to reach the illustrious peak, they still possess insights from the accumulation of their experiences, often passing that knowledge forward towards those that will be able to internalize those hard-fought lessons and grow exponentially, ultimately meaning that someone's journey can only be a bridge for the young if it was built from the same place that they are in now. A direct contrast to Gojo and Sukuna's prevalent theme of disconnect. Due to their overwhelming jujutsu talent, they simply don't have the necessary experience with needing to try beyond your level. Like how those that never needed to study can't help others become smarter. A major flaw that Sukuna doesn't realize he possesses. Despite his high and mighty disposition towards the weak, his self-centeredness is the very thing that often leaves him being caught off guard by them. In the same way Gojo was blindsided by his best friend's actions, Sukuna doesn't understand what motivates the weak. The King of Curses readily brushes this off, whereas Satoru faces it head-on, entrusting that those close to him share his ideals and will act as guiding posts for the next generation, leading to the introduction of the salaryman sorcerer Kento Nanami. Someone nowhere close to Gojo's echelon of power, but that is still undoubtedly the best teacher Itadori could have. Fully understanding why would require us to first recognize Yuji's sorcerer journey, but the main differentiating factor is that Nanami also straddles the line between sorcerer and civilian. Sukuna focuses on satiating hedonistic desires amidst his endless boredom. Gojo carves a better future contrary to his lack of direction. Both lives are grandiose and mesmerizing while being far detached from the layman's desires and struggles. Meanwhile, the simple and often overlooked efforts of the incapable provide a lot more value to people's lives, and that ultimately forms the foundation of existence. Nanami acknowledging this aspect of the weak brought him back into Jujutsu society, and Gojo acknowledging this value made Kento Yuji's greatest mentor. Something that we'll define further in a future video. Stay tuned.